Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're going to be attempting to start something new that is old, and we're going to title this series of Shirim Post-Traumatic Torah. And the attempt of what we're going to try and do in this introduction is to frame and give a space in which we can contextualize the teachings from the tzaddikim that we're going to be encountering. We've spoken at length in the series of Shirim on the inner world of trauma, how ultimately excluding clinical trauma that needs to be dealt with in a practical way, in the sense that stabilization must always precede the application of meaning, everything other than the traumas and the post-traumatic symptoms that are in need of stabilization by way of clinical intervention, a lot of the residual elements, a lot of the roshem, a lot of the trace that seems to continue to impact the individual whose mind has been traumatized, lowercase t, capital T, each person in accordance with their own understanding of trauma and the relative position in which each person's world experiences that reality of the tzimtzum and the shvira. So the Torah HaKadosha is there to give us new levushim, new ways of thinking, new ways of grappling with a reality that has lost its original innocence. Trauma, roughly translated for our purposes now, but really something we've discussed at length in the Shirim on the inner world of trauma, represents the moment in which the way that my life had previously gone is taken away, and life takes on a new shape that is different than the way that it looked before that event took place. Anything that reveals the crack within the stable ground that I assumed would always be there can be considered a traumatic moment, because the trauma is the rupture in my perception that forces me to reorient myself towards what I thought I knew. That which was habituated, that which was assumed, that which was taken for granted is suddenly revealed to be something that is not necessary, something that will not always be there simply because I thought it will always be there. The stability, the certainty, the trust, etc., etc., etc. Each person in accordance with their own level of experiencing the capital T traumas, God forbid, and lowercase t traumas. Again, we're in a generation where it's difficult to claim that there's anybody who hasn't been traumatized by the nature of reality over the last 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, 100 years, all the more so in our generation. But nevertheless, whether or not each and every person can identify with a capital T trauma, and again, that's very different than other people experiencing particular moments of acute trauma. But even if we don't want to claim that each and every person has been traumatized in a capital T notion of some person, place, or event that has created a rupture, every person is included within the shape of the lowercase t traumatic position, meaning to say the difficulties of day-to-day life that force me perpetually to come to terms with the fact that the world will not operate in accordance with my basic desires, that I am not the master of the universe, that I do not determine the outcome of everything, that the way that I think the world should go, or the way that I think other people should respond, or the way that I think other things should be, really doesn't have nearly as much of an impact on the reality of things as I thought it was. And in this coming to terms with the fact that I am not the center, and that my center might not be able to hold because the thing that I felt was so stablest in my life has been shown to be unstable. So that's a moment of trauma. That's a moment where the past way of living now faces an abysmal space that has opened up, and we're not quite sure what we're going to find on the other side. Now, again, once we've gone through the process of stabilization and the clinical work that must be done in accordance with each and every particular situation, the work of recovery from trauma, the work of recovering from that sudden tear in the fabric of my narrative and the texture of my narrative, something happens that forces me to reorient my assumptions about one thing, which is in truth just a symbol of reorienting my assumptions about everything. Even if one thing is suddenly revealed to not be the way that I expected it to be, that's enough for a sensitive person to tear their entire structure of meaning asunder, because what I thought was true is not true. Mamela, I have all these questions about what's true and what's not true. And what takes place after the trauma, what takes place after that, again, trauma in scare quotes, representing that breaking point wherein something shifts, something irreconcilable takes place that prevents me from going back to the place that I was in the secret of, and it was after these things, vayhi acharei hadvarim ha'ela, that the trauma causes a shift. It's different now. It's not the way it was yesterday. After whatever the trauma is, something shifts, something changes, and the weapons and the tools that I used for the previous segment of my story no longer work in accordance to the response necessary in the incoming experience. From a certain neurological level, on a basic level, what's taking place in the moment of trauma of any degree, whether it's a psychic trauma, psychological trauma, a spiritual trauma, something breaking in our minds that we thought was something that could be taken for granted, what happens is that the mind and its vessel breaks. The vessel is incapable of processing and drawing down the information or the immensity of the moment, experience, feeling, sense that I am experiencing at this moment. And it's like if I'm typically taking a picture of my mental images with a digital camera, the picture is no longer working. I can't snap the image. I can't see what is taking place. I can't fully wrap my head around, so to speak, the event that I'm processing. The mind, to a certain degree or another, shuts down. It goes into shock as a result of the overload and the overexposure to the immensity of reality and information that the mind can't handle, and it shuts down and it stops processing. It stops processing the thought or the event in the way that we typically process, which is by way of a digital camera, something that I can look at and see very clearly and identify and determine what it was and look back on it. And what happens when I can no longer take a digital image of that experience, that thought, that feeling that traumatizes me to a certain level, that causes me to call everything into question, that reveals the giant question marks at the basis of reality. So what happens is that the mind never stops trying to capture information. And so if my digital camera of my mind is not working, I'm going to go back to the older models and it's going to be my Polaroid camera. And when a person takes a picture with a Polaroid, so the picture doesn't develop immediately, but rather it develops in real time, to the degree that each and every time I'm looking or gazing or glancing back at that image or that moment, instead of seeing a full-on memory of what took place because my mind has processed it and neatly placed it in the file of those experiences, every time I look at that event, every time I remember that thought, every time I orient myself back to that feeling and I re-question myself, I'm overwhelmed again because it's as if I am experiencing the same thing again, because every time I look at it, I become more aware of what the event or the feeling actually was. Because each time I look at the image is coming more into focus. And therefore, the traumatic event to a certain degree is the breaking point where the mind is incapable of grasping it, but it's the post-traumatic experiences that continue to perpetuate the awareness and the sense of the impending presence of that moment of trauma. And it's the struggle with memory and integration and really processing and being able to say, this is what happened, this is what shifted in reality, to be able to identify where the problem is so that I can properly fix it, which would be a path towards health. Trauma prevents me from ever really identifying what it is that's bothering me, because every time I look back on it, it's reorienting itself and it's revealing itself in a new shape, taking on a fuller expression of the fear that my mind applies to it. And so in the nature of trauma, the post-traumatic elements of grappling with those shifts in thinking and those sudden breakages that block us from retrieving the original innocent faith that we had a moment before, and that throws us into a place of cheshbonos rabos, of new complications that seem to block, that seem to be a parsa or a partition from reaching back to that mikvah of emuna pshuta. The wall of trauma, the severity, the seriousness of that feeling of, oh my gosh, what I thought I knew, I don't know, that stands as a blockage point that prevents the person from going back past the middle to the beginning. Because now I'm after the beginning. I can't go back to that place of innocence. I can't forget that new awareness that I have about the difficulty of life, et cetera, however the trauma expresses itself. And those minios, those parsos, those blockages, those partitions that prevent the mind from going back to its original state of innocence, from that original state of tamimus, where it was able to trust, where it was able to have hope, where it was able to affirm goodness in this world, because Baruch Sha'amar v'haya ha'olam, and then that which happens, happens, and that which happens stands such a tremendous partition that blocks my ability to go back to that original naivete, that original emuna pshuta that only sees good. So the mind finds it nearly impossible to return back to that innocence. And therefore the mind is tortured. The mind continues to live with the expectation of negativity, the fear of being chased, the fear of some impending doom that's about to arrive. some moreness or some overwhelmingness that is going to come and tear everything asunder. Because what the trauma does is it disrupts any notion of situatedness. It disrupts my ability to stand strong within my position of being a self-oriented self with an awareness of how things go. And it tosses me back into a place of tohu vavohu, of the chaos that preceded order. And in the chaos that preceded order, there was no center point because the center point was everywhere. It was the hustling, bustling, and the buzzing of all of the information available at once, the overwhelmingness of the mind. But as a result of the anxiety and the anxiety that is emergent from the negative element of trauma, the negative charge of trauma, nearly always the mind, when it's opened up to the possibility of not knowing, instead of throwing itself into a place of faith, it looks at the evidence of the negative with the negativity bias instead of looking towards the positivity bias that we have the ability to open our minds up to. And because it's tending towards accentuating the negative, so the mind is now stuck in a double bind in the sense that, number one, it doesn't know. It's in a state of doubt. It's in a perpetual state of ambiguity and not knowing, and Allah ta'charif misapechas, and the rotating swords that block a person's re-entry back into the naivete and the tamimus and the childlike simplicity of the Gan Eden experience. But not only am I caught up in doubt and I'm mixed up and muddled up, but my bias is to see the negative. So now I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I deeply am aware of the fact that what is going to happen is going to be overwhelming and unmanageable. And therein lies the curse of anxiety, where a person is living perpetually in a state of negative expectancy where something bad is about to emerge. Because the only point of orientation I could look back to now is the moment where everything changed, which was a negative experience. And that's the post-traumatic stress that returns over and over and over, keeping a person in a perpetual state of being on guard of the impending moment of difficulty that's going to emerge. Now, what the Torah offers us and what our tzaddikim offer us is a path forward, a path forward, a path forward away from the traumatic breakage, a path forward from that moment where the tools that I had used until now to function with the spiritual sensibility that enables me to draw down and utilize the irreducible essence of the healing capacity of faith, when I feel I no longer have the capacity to recall those strengths, and the tools that I had yesterday have now turned into a handicap and they're not working anymore, and they make me even more broken because my old tools are not working. So when a person finds themselves in that repetition compulsion of repeating over and over, of trying to use the same ways of thinking, trying to use the same ways of orienting oneself towards faith, trying to read the Torah in the same way that we read it beforehand, and becoming frustrated over the fact that it might not be working to the degree that we need it to work in accordance with the severity of our condition. So then what a person must do is begin to reorient their minds to allowing the Torah to speak out its post-traumatic truth, for the Torah to be able to reveal that in reality, what is happening is that even after something breaks, even after something breaks, even after there's some irretrievable origin that is no longer present because we've been forced to see the tohu and the chaos of reality. So there is a path forward. There is always a path forward. There is always a path forward. The Torah offers the salve, it offers the redemption, it offers the calmness, it offers the simcha, it offers the nachama, it offers the self-awareness, it offers the calmness and the yishuv hadas and the faith and the bitachon and the self-esteem and the self-confidence and the acceptance. It offers us each and every ounce of those medicines that are necessary to process the post-trauma world, when we can't return back to that original point of naivete, where we can't rely upon the tamimus of our childhood-like innocence, because our eyes are open and we've seen that the mind in this world is forced to expose itself to the reality of all of the hastara shabatocha hastara that seems to speak so loudly against the basic childhood faith that we would like to cultivate, tamimus v'pshitus. And if a person is still trying to allow the old sirufim of Torah, the old pre-trauma Torah, to offer post-trauma solutions, so then A, we're not going to find the solution, and B, we're going to start blaming the Torah, when in truth, it's not the Torah that's not offering the response that we need. It's the fact that we're trying the old broken models of thinking to solve the new problem that has revealed itself to overpower the old model of thinking. And therefore, there has to be a hischadshus. There is a need for a renewal of the moichin, hischadshus ha-moichin. Sirufim chadashim, reorienting ourselves to the letters that we know so deeply, and reorienting ourselves to the narrative of what the Torah is coming to tell us, so that we can properly allow the Torah to reveal its healing potency, because the Torah contains within herself both the Luchos Rishonos and the Luchos Shnios. The Torah expresses itself by way of pre-trauma, which are the Luchos Rishonos, and the post-trauma, which are the Luchos Shnios. And we know from Chazal that a person must always maintain even the Shivrei Luchos within the Aron. Meaning to say that when the original pre-trauma Torah breaks, in my mind, my way of coping breaks, and I'm forced to uncover a new way of coping, which is the secret of the second Luchos that come down, I don't throw away the previous model of thinking because it's no longer working for me, as if it was meaningless, as if the new model of thinking is something separate and apart. Adrabah, Ipcha Mastaber, we carry around with ourselves the broken vessels of the first tablets that have shattered as a result of whatever trauma it was that shattered them. And the truth of the matter is that they were always meant to be shattered, even at the moment that they were giving, because the trauma is not really a result of any specific thing. The trauma is the very nature of existence itself. To be separate from God is trauma. The tzimtzum is the original trauma. The origination of the will of the infinite Kavyachol prior to existence, that in its unfathomable desire, in accordance with our graspability, so to speak, desire to create a world so that it could express its infinite light within the realms of finite limitation to the lowest degree imaginable, that in and of itself is the origination of the trauma, the beginning of the possibility of a separateness, a return back to that original trauma, and then it applies itself by birth, etc., etc. But that's severing. We don't get rid of the prior Torah, because the prior Torah is still the same Torah. It's just that the prior Torah now gives birth to a new way of looking at the prior Torah, which enables us to cope with the reality as it is in front of us right now. Again, meaning to say, this is a very important nakuda. We don't throw away, God forbid, the luchos rishonos of our experience simply because it doesn't work anymore, and then try and find the luchos shnios that seems to work. Because any luchos shnios that's disconnected from the luchos rishonos are not a true expression of the luchos. The secret of the shivrei luchos is the secret of that there exists an irreducible thread of coping and relating to reality, besimcha betuv levav, with amuna and bitachon nishav hadas, that in spite of the fact that all of the encasings of it and the levushim of it that express themselves in that pre-trauma Torah, those fall away, but something remains, and it's the irreducible thread of emuna, the emuna kolzos einon movado, that continues to exist in the aspect of the shivrei luchos, and that itself becomes the energy necessary to create the luchos shnios. That it's from the very residual essence that remains after the breaking that we rebuild the framework in which we're going to be capable of facing the new reality of that post-trauma, where we no longer have that simplicity. Because one will always need to borrow from the original simplicity. One will always need to borrow from that radical choice to believe in the face of the unknown without any possibility of being pushed away from that belief. A bechira l'mala mitam v'das. The luchos rishonos were the fundamental choice to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, derech emunah b'charti, to see meaning in the world, to see essence in the world, to see significance in the world. And even when our frameworks of significance and the narrative structures that we offer ourselves in this world, when those fall apart and the center cannot hold, we're still recreating a new narrative, but the innermost point is still the very fundamental point that rested at the core of the original expression of the luchos, which is emunah. The emuna kolzos, emuna in Hashem, emuna in Moshe, emuna in the Torah. That remains. That's there in the post-traumatic thing as well. And when a person is able to recognize the necessity of ensuring the maintenance of the shivrei luchos, the original luchos, in the aron itself that contains the second luchos, then the post-traumatic Torah orientation, the post-traumatic way of looking at myself through the lens of the Torah, is not going to stand in opposition to the original way of looking at the Torah. It's not going to contain or contend that the original way that I thought about the world was wrong. It's just going to say it couldn't stand up in accordance with the tests of what reality are, and therefore it needed to be reapplied. It needed to undergo a secret of tchiyas hamesim. It needed to descend down to the etzem haluz, to the irreducible point of the Torah that remains for each and every person. Each and every person has their os in the Torah that's unerasable, that's unscrubbable, that can't go away, not because we've earned it, but because it comes from Hashem. There's nothing we could do to erase that drop of infinity that exists within each and every neshama. It's not ours to defile. It remains. It's the secret of that there's no hopelessness whatsoever. And what happens is that when we allow the Luchos Rishonos to break because it's not working anymore for me, what we're able to uncover is the irreducible point of faith and draw it into the new way of thinking, which is going to be drawing the original way of coping into the new way of coping. And I'm going to be able to now find a post-traumatic Torah that allows me to utilize the same letters, the same framework, the same ideas, but it's just going to be read in a different way. I'm going to have to re-understand what the words mean to me. Because in the realm of the Luchos Rishonos, in the realm of the pre-traumatic Torah, Kilu there ever was one, for the moment maybe that such a thing existed. So in that space, there's the notion of Gan Eden, there's the notion of Eitz HaChaim, there's the notion of getting it right all the time, there's the notion of winning without having to win again, there's the notion of never having fallen, there's the notion of the fact that all that exists is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that all human experience is simply a cloud of non-existence. There's that perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world in a clarified way, and really all the person should have to do is look outside at reality and smell the air, and they should be lovesick with an awakening within themselves towards Hashem. The world should bespeak the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Umas HaOlam should be at our service. The Nachash should be the thing that finds diamonds from above and takes out the trash from below. But then the trauma happens, and things fall apart, and the center can't hold, and everything falls into a post-traumatic state. And the post-traumatic Torah is a new way of grappling with the deficiency, a new way of grappling with the problem, a new way of grappling with the difficulty, a new way of grappling with the human condition and the human element of it all. That in the first Luchos, we say that any of the human conditioning that we feel causes us any problems or complications should be thrown away, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu asa Adam Yashar, Hashem created the individual straight, Yashrus, a direct connectivity to the highest point imaginable. But Hema Bikshu Cheshbonos Rabos, but after the Shvira, after the trauma, there's the reality of Hema Bikshu Cheshbonos Rabos, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu places us into a world where there's all these different shifts and changes and colors that are perpetually changing, and the Gehenim that Rabbi Nachman saw in the world, or a world that is contained within the belly of the snake that the Rashash saw, or the ongoing battle that the Ramchal saw, or the secret of the doubled darkness that is concealed upon itself that the Balatanya saw, or the concealment upon concealment that Rabbi Nachman saw, or the darkened forest that the Baal Shem Tov saw, or the Bittul Torah that the Gra saw. All of these elements of concealment, these come into play in the post-traumatic Torah. And it's in that place that we have to learn how to grapple with ourself in relationship to the world in a way that can allow us to accept the struggle, to accept the process of coming to faith rather than just maintaining faith. And when a person uncovers this Torah of the Baal Tshuva, this Torah of reorienting myself after the original truth has dimmed and it was no longer working for me, a person uncovers the capacity of Chedushay Torah, a person uncovers the capacity of allowing the Torah to reveal itself in its true vibrancy. The casing remains the same, never changing. The externalization of it maintains the same essential structure. That is never changing. But what shifts is the inner content through which I allow the Torah to offer me what I so desperately seek, which is not spiritual ascendancy. I see comfort, nechama. Rachok mimeni menachem eshev nafshi. It's a privilege to have the issue be one of spiritual growth, where a person wants to grow along the ladders of spirituality in order to be a Bal Hasaga, in order to see visions, in order to draw down Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh, as each Jew and each person is capable of doing. But that's the privilege of a Torah Rishona, of the Luchos Rishonos. The Luchos Shnios are a Torah of survival. The Luchos Shnios are a Torah of the irreducible Etzem Haluz that remains after all things, like the Vilna Gaon writes in the end of his Likutim on Safed Niusa, that the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was death, and being exiled out of the country was being buried and being attacked by the anti-Semites throughout the generations, are the things that come and eat away at the body in the grave. But nevertheless, there were lights of spirituality that were the yeshivos and the Rosh Yeshiva and the Torah that was coming forth, and even that was forgotten, but then even something else remained, and then that was destroyed as well, to the degree that nothing remains anymore. The only thing that remains is the Sapiyah to Yeshua, the Etzem Haluz, the Torah of the Luz, the Torah of the Chaim that comes out of the Saf HaMaves. The Maves is the death of the original Luchos, the original ideal that I was capable of living with, the trust, the comfort, the ease in which I was able to process things. And then things fall apart, and things die, and there's a misa. And then what happens is that the Etzem Haluz is in the skala. And that etzem haluz, that irreducible point of the Torah, begins to revitalize the individual when a person comes back to Bereshis, when a person comes back to the beginning. And that's the secret of the post-traumatic Torah, where I can recover systems of meaning through the lens of the tzaddikim. And again, the heavy lifting of all of this is already done. All the lifting necessary is belief in the Torah of the tzaddikim amitim. There is nothing more valuable for a person to do at this point for themselves, spiritually and therapeutically, than to learn the inner teachings of Hasidus and Pnimius HaTorah in the way that it's meant to be learned, in the way of vulnerability, in the way of opening up the book and saying prior to looking at the letters, Rebbeinu Shloim, I don't want spiritual grasp. I don't want aliyos ha'olamos. I don't want to be a tzaddik. I don't want to be a makobel. I don't want anything but yishav hadas. I want to be able to function in this world, Rebbeinu Shloim. And I believe deeply that embedded within the words of your tzaddikim, I'll be able to uncover the salve of redemption that I need in order to function today. The medicine that I need today. The Nukud of Aleph that I need in order to function through this post-traumatic reality wherein I no longer see you in a revealed way. That's been taken from me through the Tzimtzum. And in order to allow the Torah to do its work, to truly reveal itself within the Luchos Shnios, what we have to learn how to do is accept the process of the shift from Luchos Rishonos to Luchos Shnios. When a person encounters an event, when a person encounters a framework of maturity where they come to realize that the infantile faith or the wrong way of thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the twisted, shameful orientations of thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or whatever idolatrous impulse continues to exist in our minds, when a person is prepared to undergo a shift, we have to accept that as not a negative thing, but as the next step of revealing the Torah. Again, nothing is changing externally, God forbid. Zos HaTorah lo tiyeh muchlefes. But once we're aware that the external shape of the Torah never has to change because it's fundamentally expressing itself at every moment in an infinite way, that gives us infinite freedom to reorient to the inner tzirufim of the letters to see, how will I draw comfort from the words of the tzaddikim today? How will I read this Torah in accordance with my mind in 2024, in accordance with what I've experienced? And the natural way of reading must be that I believe deeply that this Torah has not yet been interpreted in the right way until my eyes lay themselves on those words, each person in accordance to their own world. The giving of the Torah happens to each and every person, and the giving of the Torah of the tzaddikim happens to each and every person. And the miracle of the tzaddikim and the hafatzas ha'ma'ayanos is a nes nigla for each and every person, meaning to say that when each and every person opens a Sefer HaKadosh, or is learning a daf, or is learning whatever they're learning, there is an orientation to realizing that the relief that I need from this teaching, the spiritual relief, the dveikus that I need to encounter as a result of this new spiritual orientation that is going to enter my mind through the encounter with this text that was written by the Heilige Neshamos of Yir Tzadikim Rebbeinu Shloim, nobody has ever needed it as badly as me. Nobody has ever had the kalim to receive the inner content as I have in this moment. Nobody will be able to reveal the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a low place like I am capable of doing. Each person has to realize that they're the singular voice, they're the singular place that the words of the tzaddikim were speaking to. When a person learns the words of the tzaddikim in that way, the meaning survives its own death. The meaning of the text, the significance of the ideas, the power of the ideas, the true nature in which the ideas work, it survives any moment that appears to negate its value. Because what remains is the creativity and the freedom to utilize my imagination to imagine the world that I find myself in as I see it from the perspective of how Hashem is expressing himself. I see it from a perspective of Yichud Ilah. I choose to see the good, derech hamuna b'charti. I choose to uncover the therapeutic possibility of redemption in each and every moment. Not because I have a natural positivity bias, not because the neshama has a natural positivity bias, but there's no other option. There's no time for pessimism. There's no time anymore. Eis lasos la'Hashem hifru sarasecha, as Rashbi says in the beginning of the Idraba, and as the Ramchal is being masber so powerfully in Adir Bamarom, that there comes a time of Eis lasos la'Hashem where a person has to do for Hashem hifru sarasecha, that there's an undoing of the original way of thinking about the Torah, the limitations that I applied to myself, the shame that I applied to myself by way of the original way of expecting perfection from myself or expecting real graspability or spiritual growth from myself. That's fallen away. Avi v'imi azavuni. Right? It's broken. That place of Adam Yashar, it broke already. I find myself now in the Cheshbonos Rabos. I find myself after the breaking, after the fall, because it's always after the fall. Mekadmat dana, shvira always already happened. The trauma always already happened. We're always on a certain degree in a post-traumatic state, to the degree that even the Luchos Rishonos were post-traumatic. They're post the encounter of Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the true expression of the Torah. And in relative to that experience, the Luchos Rishonos themselves are considered Luchos Shnios. And in relationship to that, then there's the secondary stage that comes afterwards. Each stage is going to be post-traumatic to a certain degree, because if I'm aware and I'm conscious, it's post-trauma. The separation has already taken place. I have been cut externally from the infinite space in which there was nothing other than the infinite, and there was no capacity to contemplate on anything whatsoever, because all that exists was the infinite. Once there's contemplation, it's already after the cut, it's already after the tzimtzum. If I'm speaking, if I'm thinking, it's already translation, it's already having fallen away from original place. But nevertheless, the way we orient ourselves is that there's a level of the Luchos Rishonos, there's the Torah of Atzilus, there's the Torah of being connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at every moment, there's the Torah of being connected in my best self, there's the Torah of living out my ideal self, where I get to realize the ideal. And then when that falls apart, there's a secondary Torah, the Luchos Shnios, which is not about realizing any ideal. It's not about leaving this world and going up there. It's about bringing up there down here. It's about idealizing the real. It's about being on the ground, and instead of expecting perfection and the shame that comes along with it, I hope towards being human, and I hope towards the process of becoming a Ben Adam. And then the Torah continues to provide its fundamental koach of refuah, the Sam HaChaim, the elixir of life that gives a person another capacity to breathe. And so the Torah of Atzilus is the Torah of the Eitz HaChaim, where everything is good. Then there's the Torah of Bria. There's the Torah of Bar. Bar is something that's outside, something that's no longer inside the circle of unity, something that has now been pushed out, and it's now split. It's the Torah of Bria. It's the Torah of Bina. It's the Torah that we encounter. The Torah that we have is the post-traumatic Torah. Avada, the real pre-traumatic Torah, exists nested within the post-traumatic Torah. The Luchos Shnios contain within themselves the Luchos Rishonos. The only difference is that if I only had the Luchos Rishonos, if I only had the pre-traumatic Torah, so then it wouldn't be such a chiddush, because all I have is a Torah that allows me to function spiritually without any problems. But by that thing breaking apart, the shvira taking place, and the Torah surviving and being able to reveal its potency and koach of refuah, even within the shattered vessels, even within the Luchos Shnios, which is the post-traumatic Torah, all that does is it gives me the capacity to draw all of that post-traumatic excess and bring it back to the pre-traumatic Torah to reveal how potent the pre-traumatic Torah itself is. That it's the same cloud that we always see based on the Rebbe Shlita's Torah, that we go down from the original unity into disunity, not because disunity is where we're meant to find ourselves, but that every ounce of disunity is another opportunity to refine it, process it, and elevate it back up to the recognition of unity, thereby elevating and magnifying and revealing the infinite capacity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light to contain not only the good, but the apparent negative within itself as well, and the secret of the yichud of the hafachim, and the secret of being okay pre-trauma and post-trauma, before tzimtzum and after tzimtzum, and the secret of bein kach u'bein kach nikrabanim. And when a person has the capacity of entering into the Torah of Bria, entering into the post-traumatic Torah, we begin to look a little bit at what our Torah is telling us differently. Instead of those eyes towards perfection, it allows us to look at the Torah with eyes of healing. Zok the Heliga Arizal, that the word Bereshis starts with a beis. The Torah does not speak in the language of Atzilus. The Torah does not speak in the language of that perfectibility. Ella bebria, rather it speaks in that externalization, that first place of bria and bina and severity, post-trauma. Therefore, the Torah begins with a beis because it's the Torah of creation. It's the Torah of the post-traumatic experience. Again, beis is duality. Beis is the apparent splitness, the apparent lie. Because the aleph, the first letter, hints to Atzilus. Atzilus starts with an aleph and Bria starts with a beis. Atzilus represents the unity of the aleph. Bria represents the splitness of the beis. Atzilus represents the pre-trauma. Bria represents the post-trauma, and there's a parsa that exists between them. And the Torah that we orient ourselves to is the Torah of the second world. It's also known that this Torah of Bria is the place that Bina is going to be found. Bina and the severity and the need to pick ourselves up. Hamevin davar mitoch davar. processing davar mitoch davar. When there's a davar, there was the original davar, the original dibros, and then mitoch davar, the second dibros. The ikr nakuda of bina and the Baal Tshuva and the secret of post-trauma is how to understand the post-traumatic world and intuit and return myself back to the pre-traumatic world with room to function in my post-traumatic self, to see how all of it is part of one fell swoop of the autobiographical self. Therefore, our Torah begins with an osbeis, which is the Rosh Tevos of Bina and separation and understanding. And this, says the Arizal, is the secret of Rosh Hashanah, B'Tishrei Nivra Ha'olam. This is the time of din that a person encounters, which is the secret of the left hand underneath a person's head, the severity that precedes light. Because Chachma is the world of Atzilus, Chachma is the world of unity, Chachma is the pre-traumatic Torah, where everything bespeaks Bittul and everything bespeaks the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Bina is the left side, Bina is severity, Bina is the splintering of experience that forces me now to be Mevin Davar Mitoch Davar. It's also the place where Simcha is going to come from. Which is why Bereishis says that Arizal's letters of Ba Tishrei, Tishrei is on its way. And the Arizal continues describing how all of this gets expressed fundamentally in the secret of the Shvira of the Kalim, which is the world of our Torah, that we live in that post-traumatic Torah, in the Torah of the Beis. Now, we also know that the Heilige Vilna Gaon and the Rizhiner point out, and the Rebbe was discussing this very much for a number of weeks, about 2 months ago, rather, that we know that everything in the entirety of the Torah is contained within the first word of Bereshis. Everything is in that original beginning of the splitness. If I could understand that the Torah is speaking to me as a post-traumatic subject, then I can allow the Torah to speak to me as a Ben Adam and not as a Malach, not on the level of Torah of Atzilus. If I think the Torah is speaking to me on a level of Atzilus, when in fact I'm living in a world of Bria, I'm going to have unmanageable ideals that are never going to align with the reality of my life. It's only when I understand that as a Ben Adam, I am receiving a Torah of Bria, which is the Beis, which is the split, which is Bina, which is severity, which is post-trauma, which is a Davar Mitoch Davar, the Luchos Shnios that emerge out of the Luchos Rishonos and need to be drawn back into the Luchos Rishonos to reveal the yichud of the prat within the klal and the period within the achdus. When I accept that the Torah is speaking to me as Ben Adam and not as a Malach, and that I am human, and that's why I deserve getting the Torah, because we struggle, because we're post-trauma, then I can find redemption within the Torah. Then I can find redemption within the Torah. When I understand deeply that Bereshis, there's a splitness, and I accept myself on those terms, and I accept the world on those terms, and the only thing I don't accept is my level of connectivity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the das that I try and cultivate within my mind, and the yichud of emunah and bitachon and mitzvos and Torah and kindness and shalom and all of the good things that a person can choose to do. So in that place, a person is entering into the entirety of the Torah, Bereshis. And Zok the Heilige Gaon and the Rizhiner, that no, it's not only the word Bereshis that contains the entirety of the Torah, but it's also the Osbeis of Bereshis, meaning just highlighting what we've been saying, that it's really in the splitness, that original traumatic split that gives birth to the entirety of the Torah. But Zok the Heilige Gra, in the name of his Talmidim, that our Rebbe said also, and the Rizhiner said this as well, that it's not just the Beis that represents the center of the Torah, but rather it's the innermost dot, the black dot in the center of the Beis, the Nekuda Behechala, the point within the Heichal that represents the sum total of the Torah, the Yud, that Ikr Nekuda of Bittul. And so what the Rebbe has been talking about is that if you magnify in on that tiny dot that rests at the center of the Beis, that rests at the center of the Torah of Bria, the post-traumatic Torah, what you'll come to find is an Aleph. That it's an Aleph, it's the Aleph of Anoichi, it's the Aleph of Atzilus, it's the secret of the Luchos Rishonos that are nested within the Luchos Shnios. To reveal that by coming to terms with the post-traumatic nature of being human, I am in truth revealing the Koyach HaAmiti of the Luchos Rishonos, which are in truth the value of being a human being. When I can draw the Luchos Shnios, the Bechina of Torah Shebal Peh, back into the Luchos Rishonos in the aspect of Torah Shebechsav, the Pratim, back into the Klal, the post-trauma back into the pre-trauma, to reveal that the pre-trauma also already had within itself the koach to sustain itself, even post-trauma. That's where a person develops the connection and the secret of uncovering the Torah of the Aleph, the pre-traumatic Torah within the Beis, which is the post-traumatic Torah. And that's the secret of Kishet Tigiu La'avnei Shayesh Tahor, when a person comes to that place of grappling with the problem of negativity and good, and the trauma of it all, as Rabbi Nachman describes in the 51st Torah of Likutei Moharan, it says, Al tom rimayim mayim. Don't say that there's two Torahs. Don't, God forbid, think that the Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shnios are separate things. Don't, God forbid, think that the lowest point and the highest point are two separate things. It's all an orientation. It's all a refiguring. It's all the redevelopment of a narrative structure that is therapeutically viable for me in the lens of my emunah that I've received from those that I fundamentally trust with the belief in Hashem and Moshe, that the tzaddikim have done the heavy lifting. All we need to do is believe in the imaginative potential of the mind to heal itself with the spiritual concepts developed by our tzaddikim and literally spoon-fed to us. In our generation, spoon-fed to us. There's never been a time where the pain has been more. Each and every person at every point in history has the ability to say that. But as history continues its march towards redemption, it becomes clearer and clearer that it's a mima amakim karasi Hashem, that I call out to you from the depths. I've been forced into the depths. I've been forced into that post-traumatic response process. And I need to offer myself the possibility of finding redemption, of finding hope, of finding a second naivete, of returning to faith, of accepting simplicity through all of the complications that brings, of being Moser Nefesh for simplicity, of living in that Torah of the Beis and revealing the Aleph within it, which is the secret of Bo El Paro, which the Zohar Kadosh says is the secret of the trauma. It's the secret of how Hashem is hidden within what? Within the palace of Paro itself. It's a secret of the tzimtzum, where the tzimtzum itself, that breakage between before and after, is also going to be revealed to have been the gesher tsar ma'od, the very very narrow bridge, which is the bond between the luchos rishonos and the luchos shnios, the bond between pre-trauma and post-trauma, to reveal that Hashem was before creation, Hashem is during creation, and Hashem is after creation. That it's the same Hashem. Ani Hashem lo shinisi. Erech hapayim rav chesed v'emes notzer chesed la'alafim. The Yud Gimel Midas of Rachamim, the Nekuda of Ba Tishrei of Elul, is a reorientation. We come to terms in Elul that Luchos have broken. The year has been a traumatic year. Every year is a traumatic year because every year has not yet been the year. We desire Meireshas Hashana. We hope that this will be the year, and we end up with Shana, that this is not the year. And then the Luchos break. The tools that I thought would bring about the redemption of the self and the coping have fallen apart, and I'm forced to reorient and redevelop a set of luchos shnios, of developing again, of learning what Bereshis means again, of learning Tikkun Zohar again, of learning the Aleph Beis again, of coming to terms with the okayness that I will find only when I allow myself to let go of the old levush, as Rabbi Nachman describes in Torah Chaf Aleph with regards to the Nekud of Elul, which is shifting our levushim, shifting the chashmal, shifting the old perspectives through which we've seen the Torah as the ability to cope, and revealing to ourselves the new way of coping, the Torah Chadasha Me'iti Tisei, the new Torah that's going to emerge from you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the new ability to find Tchias HaMesim min HaTorah, Tchias HaMesim min HaTorah minayin, Zak Tehelig Asay Yisharim, that the secret of Tchias HaMesim is the secret of the Etzem Haluz, the secret of the indestructible nature of the Torah itself and our capacity to function with faithful narratives in our minds through the secret of Derech Hamuna B'charti, and the sha'ashuim of Torah that provide solace to a tired spirit at each and every moment in existence, and that lule sarascha sha'ashua yazavadati. The ability to do this rests in the permission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers us to see our lives in a new way, to shift the narrative. Rabbi Nachman says as follows. Rabbi Nachman says in Torah Nun Vav that this element of the hastara shebetoicha hastara, this element of the trauma, the post-trauma, the post-trauma, the post of the post-trauma, all of the stuckness that a person experiences, all of the concealment that a person experiences, all of those places in a person's life where they can't find the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where things have fallen apart. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself by way of a hastara shebetoicha hastara, a concealment within a concealment. Zak the Heilige Rebbe, Rabbi Nachman, that when a person comes to contemplate the concealment within the concealment, what they'll come to find is not only is there Torah hidden there, but it's the most potent form of Torah. It's the most potent form of Sisrei Torah, because when a person is beginning to reorient themselves and find a new way of coping with the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in their lives, and they're redeveloping those luchos shnios, and they're becoming okay with the fact that, okay, And you like broken things and you like broken vessels and you're only masher your shechina on imperfect measurements and hineni mekabelatz me to be imperfect. I accept upon myself the yoke of being imperfect and the yearning desire that I'll have towards you, and I allow myself to retell my story to myself. So in that place, we find the depths of the Torah of Mashiach, the depths of the most medicinal and redemptive teachings of the tzaddikim themselves, to the point that the hastar shabbatoicha hastar, the concealment upon concealment, becomes the receptacle through which we will be capable of drawing down the light of redemption. That the vessels of that post-traumatic orientation of spiritual self towards its higher power and all of the coping mechanisms therein will be shown to actually have been the site of real growth. That's the place where the growth comes from. And that's where we're at right now. The secret of what the Meshilach describes as Torah Hashem Tamima Meshivas Nafesh, that the only way to learn Torah is a demand for the Torah to restore my soul. To restore my soul, I need restoration. I need restoration. Something broken, I need restoration. And the only reason that I can allow the Torah to continue to restore me each and every time, even though I've tried over and over and all of those attempts at restoration have failed, is because of the first part of the pasuk. Torah Hashem Tamima, the Torah of Hashem is perfect. Zok the Heligat Tzadikim in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. The tzaddikim say in the name of the Baal Shem Tov that what does it mean, Torah Hashem Tamima? It means that even after all is said and done and all of the medicinal elements have been secreted from within the Torah, it hasn't even begun to express its functionality. It hasn't even begun to express the unlimited nature of narrative structure that the Jewish individual is capable of doing with the Sha'ashu'ei Emunah, with the playfulness of faith, of ensuring that the never-changing external shape of the Torah become a vessel for the ever-changing innermost nakuda of beginning again at each moment, beginning again and again and again, and finding new ways of coping, new ways of strength. That's when a person is able to say, Torah Hashem Tamima Meshivas Nafesh, when I'm aware that I'm not erasing the original way that I looked at the Torah, God forbid. I'm keeping those broken luchos, and I'm aware that hidden within those broken luchos are the secret of the luz, the secret of that irreducible thing that remains. And it's from that irreducible thing that remains from the previous breaking that I will rebuild the new palace, with the awareness that it might break again. And I'll have the ability and the freedom to rebuild it again as well. And this is the secret, like we began to say, Torah represents the process of coming to terms with the post-traumatic nature of being human and the ever present attempt of returning back to that place of pre-trauma. And even when we return to pre-trauma, we're still in a state of trauma because we're still separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we'll always sense ourselves as somewhat separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu because Kedushasi l'ma'alu mikdushaseichem. But instead of post-traumatic stress, it will be transformed into a secret of post-traumatic growth, which is the secret of the Gevuros and their Shoresh that are the boiling point that motivate the intensity of the desire to reach higher and higher when I come to terms with the fact that there is no ceiling to the grasp that I can have of the infinite. Yishuv Adas is an infinite thing, and I can perpetually be uncovering more and more. And when I come to terms with that post-traumatic process of the Torah, that up and down, and the shakla and the tarya, and the mistakes and the fixing, and the mistakes and the fixing, so that's what Torah represents. Torah is that difficult process through which a person goes through in their life. And so the Heilig Asod Yesharim says as follows, he says, Tchias HaMesim min HaTorah minayim. That Tchias HaMesim, the rejuvenation of the self, the rebuilding of the vessels after the original shattering, the post-traumatic growth that takes place through the post-traumatic orientation of a Torah that will heal the mind and its capacity to continue in the unfathomable and unreasonable attempt to find joy and connectivity and emunah shlema with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to say Baruch Sha'amar V'haya Ha'olam. So that Tchias HaMesim comes from within the Torah itself. The ability to renew comes from within the ever-changing process of things, which is the need to renew. Without the breaking and the building that the Torah represents, there would be no need to renew again. So Tchias HaMesim, the rejuvenation of that thing that died, takes place through the Torah itself. It takes place through that process itself. Zak the Sod Yesharim, this is why it says that La'asad Lava, when Tchias HaMesim takes place, Kipshuta Mamish, B'mumim Yivra'u, that each and every person who passed away will be rejuvenated with their blemish, with their particular mum, with their particular irreducible mum that they had, their mark of being human, that point of deficiency within the mind, that point of personal struggle, that point of avodah. It will always remain. I will be born again. I will renew myself again with that sense of that thing that was broken previously. Why? Chazal say, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to identify the person as the previous person. It's only when I hold on to the marks of the previous breakdown that I can continue the strength of the incoming breakthrough. And the mum is the secret of the last name of the Shem Ayin Beis. The Shem Ayin Beis, the name of Kriyas Yamsuf, the name of breaking through, the name of carrying onwards, of the Yichud and Katnus, of the secret of that post-traumatic development and strength that comes from the shattering and feeling that I'm in that place of chesed now. I'm in that place of expansivity. And then that last unit, the 72 units of the three letters that compose the 216 letter name of the 72 letter name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is really 72 units of three, which is 216 letters. The last one is Mem Vav Mem, which represents Mum, meaning to say that at the end of the day, when a person comes to that Shleimus Hadas and the Shem of Ayin Beis and that unity of the mind, what we have to remind ourselves is that we're still Balmum, and being a Balmum is okay. A Mum is Gematria of Elokim. There's a vessel, there's a trauma, and I will reveal Hashem Hu Elokim, which is why Mum is Rosh Tevos Mati V'loy Mati, touching and not touching. I'm there and I'm not there at the same time. I'm betwixt and between. I'm drawing the post-trauma back into the pre-trauma and revealing that the pre-trauma contained the post-trauma within it and revealing the secret unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu across the board. And Be'ezras Hashem in the incoming Shirim we'll go through some of the Torah's narratives on this, the words of the Tzaddikim Be'ezras Hashem, in the hopes that it will be a Daracheha, Darchei Noam. The purpose of the Torah is to be a Daracheha, Darchei Noam, to be Mamtik, the Dinim B'Sharasham, through the Yidgim Midos of Rachamim, to transform the difficulty and the trauma to a place of growth, and to sing the song of Asilava, which is the Shir Meruba, which is the song that comes out of the trauma of the body itself, revealing that the body has always been keeping score in this worldliness, in this place of concealment. And we come to celebrate the Mumim, we come to celebrate the secret that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we remember you even in the times of concealment, and we develop for ourselves over and over new ways in which you can be revealed. And when we go through the acrobatics of the mind to validate and to be matzdik the din on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to judge HaKadosh Baruch Hu favorably, Kavyachol, to judge HaKadosh Baruch Hu favorably, which is the language of Tziduk Hadin, of being a tzaddik, who judges HaKadosh Baruch Hu favorably, who sees Hashkacha Pratis in the world, and that way we recover the Torah Chadasha Me'itititze. Chazal say that Torah La'asilavo is going to be, the Torah of today is going to be like Hevel in relationship to the Torah of the future. Zok Teheliga Kilas Yaakov, it doesn't mean, God forbid, that anything changes. It just means that there's two ways of orienting in this world. There's the Hevel Neshama and there's the Kayin Neshama, and each and every person is both and. Hevel is the Luchos Rishonos. Hevel is being okay. Hevel is having my stuff together. Kayin is breaking. Kayin is falling. Kayin is the shattering. And Zakta Kilas Yaakov, nowadays we thought that we needed a Torah of Hevel. We needed a Torah of perfection. But come the future, we're going to come to a place of a Torah of Kayin. We're going to develop a post-traumatic Torah, a Torah that contains the refuah within itself. The refuah within itself, the aleph that is nested within the base itself, Be'ezras Hashem.